Hey guys, Carlos Colon with Georgia Perimeter Homes, and let's talk appraisals. So, whether it's a seller's market or a buyer's market, it's not a matter of if it will happen, but only a matter of when. So it's important to understand how all this fits together. It's important to remember the basic saying, a home is only worth what a buyer is willing to pay for it. So while we're about to jump into that subject matter, please remember to subscribe to our channel and also hit the bell notification if you want to see more videos like this, and that way you are notified when the next videos come out. So, appraisals, what are they? All right, so the basic definition for an appraisal is an expert opinion of the value of something. So it doesn't always have to be real estate. It can be a person. It can be whether land or building, it doesn't matter. But the important word within that is opinion. The reason why this is important is you can get 4 or 5 different appraisers and they will all say a different number as far as the value of what they think something is worth. What's important to know is if it's an expert opinion, all of those values, all of those 4 or 5 values should be relatively close to each other within a certain margin. Now, this means that when you're getting an appraisal on a home, a commercial building, or anything of that sort, it's important to make sure that you don't get disheartened by the fact that someone else might not value your property as much as you do. The important part is the appraiser's there for one reason. It's to protect either A, the buyer directly if they're buying cash, or B, the lender or the mortgage company because they're the ones actually buying the property if you're taking a loan out to purchase one. And so their job is to protect that person from that investment to make sure that that investment is worthwhile. Now, the word expert. Typically, this implies that the person has received an appraiser's license, which means they have gone through the courses, they understand the numbers, and they have been approved by the state to be able to do this. Now, that is how expert is defined in this case. Now, how does an appraisal work? That is probably the most important thing that we'll cover today, and it all starts with 3 different approaches. One of them is going to be the comparable approach. This is going to be recent sales that have happened within the last 3 to 6 months. It's important to note that an appraiser can go back 12 months if they need to, but they usually try not to because the market 12 months ago is not necessarily the market in the last 3 months. So they try to go within 3 months first, and then they go farther out within location or timeline if they need to find more comps, so to say. The second approach is going to be income approach. This is going to be best used for income producing properties, rental homes, apartment complexes. That's the best way to think about that. Also commercial buildings. When it comes to leased buildings, that's also an income approach on valuation. And then the last one's going to be replacement or cost approach. Now, an appraiser's job is to look at all 3 of these approaches and determine which one is the most valuable for this particular property. When I say most valuable, I'm referring to like kind. And so for the purposes of this video, we're really going to stick to residential dwellings, not commercial and not investment properties. So when we're talking about residential dwellings, 99.999% of the time, we're going to be talking about the comparable approach, which is going to be recent sales of like-kind properties. Like-kind meaning similar bedrooms, square footage, neighborhood, location, overall location. Also acreage is important when we talk about this, and so that's what like-kind means. We're not comparing condos to a farm. Those are not like-kind at all. So if that helps. Now, so it's important to understand how they do that. So the first thing they do, they look at the square footage for the subject property or the property that we're selling or buying, and they look for the closest sales that have happened in the last 3 months. They compare square footage and apples to apples, so to say, to make sure that we're not comparing a 2,500 square foot home to a 900 square foot home, because that's not really like kind. Now, in a perfect world, an appraiser knows that the adjustments made to each property shouldn't be enormous. That will tell you whether it's like kind or not. So in doing so, that also means that if you have a basement home, we should be comparing to other basement homes. If you have a pool in the backyard, an in-ground pool specifically, not above ground, we should also be comparing to homes that also have in-ground pools. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't, but they try to stick to those guidelines if possible. If we have a one-story house, we want to really compare to other one-story houses. And same goes for two-story houses. If we have a four-sided brick home that was built in the 1980s, we really want to probably stick to that relative year and relative build quality, not necessarily a 2018 or 2020 build. And so it's really important to understand those pieces when they talk about, or we talk about, what are comps. Now, their goal in using comps or recent sales is to make the sale like the subject. So if the subject property that we're selling was bigger than the comp, then at that point they will subtract the difference in square footage and multiply it by a factor of 35, 45, and this is variable depending on your area and location of your home. And so they do that and adjust that comp accordingly, whether up or down, to make it like the subject property. Now they do this for, in my opinion, it should always be at least 6 properties. Sometimes they only need, though, 3 to justify a price point. And so it's important to understand that they don't always use 6. I think it's always smart to use 6 anyway before you list a home, just to make sure that you know it's going to be okay. But it's not a guideline that an appraiser has to use. They have to use at least 3. Now, after that, they get a range. As you can imagine, all 6 of those properties will come up with a different number for the subject property if it was like the subject property. And then at that point, that gives us our range of lowest to highest range for that particular sale. And it's the appraiser's job to give their opinion on where within that range your value for the subject property sits. This is where each appraiser will give you a different opinion. And so sometimes it gets a little sticky because you're like, well, he could have easily given me the extra 1,000 within the range that we're in. He just chose not to. So your agent has the right to also fight this appraisal if it's not fair or not done correctly, or you feel it wasn't done correctly. Make sure that you defer to your real estate agent and have that conversation if your appraisal came in low. And also, this also ties into seller contributions, and we won't get too far into that, but make sure that every deal is not the same, right? So when an appraiser is working, sometimes the condition makes a big difference. So if the subject property is heavily damaged, the condition might be poor, and the subject properties might be average condition, and so they'll subtract off the other ones to make it like the subject, and then you get your range again. So everything is adjusted. That's important to know. It also goes into the quality of improvements that we have done, so there's a different video about that. So if you have any questions, look through our channel, you'll get that one. So now, with that said, it's important to know that that approach is not always the best approach when it comes to other kinds of property. Like we said, apartment complexes and income-producing properties, sometimes the value is much higher because the income that is provided or produced from those properties justifies a much higher sales price than the recent sales. And so it's important to understand that an appraiser's job is to look at all 3 of those and decide which one is the most appropriate approach for this type of property. Okay? Then they get that report back to the lender. The lender goes through it to make sure there's no additional questions that are needed, and then they give that to the buyers for them to review to understand what the bank is willing to do on this particular property. So that gives you a general gist of it, of appraisals per se. And what you need to know that I haven't mentioned yet is that sometimes an appraisal will stick with a property for a certain amount of time. To give you a great example, if you get an FHA appraisal, normally, and when I say normally, I mean it's not easy to get this reversed. 90% of the time or 95% of the time, that appraisal will stick with that property for 6 months after it was completed. So you might terminate that deal and go, that appraisal is way too low, I'm not doing that. And that FHA, for example, appraisal might stick with that property, and you go back under contract 3 or 4 months later, guess what's going to pop back up? That appraisal. And they're going to say, we have to use that appraisal. And so it's important to communicate with your agent about what's happened and what the history of that property is when it comes to appraisals, so we know what to do when the next deal comes on board. All right, so if you have any questions about that, reach out to us. And again, please subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell notification button in order to get notifications every time that a video is released with information like this. To reach out to us, our number is 770-314-1285, and check out our website if you want to see some beautiful homes at www.georgiaperimeterhomes.com. Thanks. Bye.